thinking about operationalizing ESG, let's do a quick kind of round robin here on a few topics. I have just quick hits for both of you. Emma, role of the board in CSRD reporting. How should clients be thinking about that?
That's a great question and one that comes up often for our clients. So they'll be asking us, does my double materiality assessment need board approval? The answer to that question is no. You might, in practice, want your executive to be on board with your double materiality conclusions, but you don't need a formal board approval. In terms of the CSRD report, that will be a sustainability section in the EU management report of your European subsidiary that's in scope of CSRD. So that EU management report does need board approval from the local company boards. However, if you decide to do CSRD global reporting, for example, you'll still need the local board to approve, but you won't necessarily need your US parent company board to approve the CSRD report.
How should companies be thinking about including their auditor as they're going through their CSRD reporting process?
Definitely, that's something that we are really advising companies to get your auditor on board early to avoid surprises later down the line. You don't want to have problems from your auditor 1 month before you have to file your CSRD report. So we say absolutely engage your auditor early, have regular check-ins with them to make sure that they're on board with the processes and the disclosures that you plan to be making.
Okay, Michael, question we get probably most often the last 6 months. I have all of this required reporting I'm working towards. What should I be doing with my voluntary sustainability reporting?
The answer I'm about to give you is really different than the answer that I thought I was going to be giving in 2022. So in 2022, everybody liked to talk about how ESG was this alphabet soup of acronyms. There was the TCFD, there was the GRI, there was the UN SDG, there was the CDP, the SBTI, and that the regulators were coming into the rescue and they were going to clear the field of all of these voluntary target setting and reporting frameworks. And that really hasn't ended up being the case. In fact, in the course of the last year, we've seen an uptick in corporate and other stakeholder demands that their customers and suppliers and vendors participate in voluntary processes such as the CDP. That being said, we are witnessing attempts at convergence. So for example, currently much of the CDP framework, whether on climate or other topics, is attempting to converge with the requirements of things like the California rules and the CSRD to make sure that companies aren't answering so many different questions that don't overlap with each other. But it still remains a key requirement for many investors and corporate customers that in addition to compliance with the CSRD, companies participate in these voluntary processes, whether that's the CDP or the SBTI. One reason for that is there isn't complete overlap between regulations and these voluntary processes. So even if you are subject to the CSRD or subject to the California rules, that doesn't mandate that you participate in the SBTI. And so that voluntary process is supplementary relative to these regulations. For the CDP, it may very well be the case that in a couple of years, once companies have started to publish, say, their CSRD reports, that large corporates will say, hey, you don't need to participate in the CDP if you've submitted a CSRD report, and only apply that requirement to those customers or more often suppliers and vendors who aren't subject to these regulations. But even then, I think it's likely that there's going to be continuing demand for CDP submissions, for example, because, well, one reason is the CDP gives you a score. And that allows for comparability between different suppliers and vendors that isn't really possible when it comes to the CSRD or other regulations where company disclosure follows a set number of questions and topics, but there's going to be enormous variation in how companies disclose. And you can't simply look at 3 different potential vendors and say, well, this one has an A and this one has a C.
Right. I think we're going to see a lot of evolution in reporting in the next couple of years. So fasten your seatbelt.